Hi everyone, this is the SIG Cluster Lifecycle meeting of November the 14th, and let's see what we're going to talk about today. I'll share the meeting notes here in the chat as well. First off, we have Ryan Phillips with Kubernetes and Bootkube.
Hey, yeah, so the document is shared on the agenda. You can link it as well in chat. Basically, I wanted to just go over and bring up some of the technical differences on kubeadm and Bootkube, since they are sort of similar projects and they can both benefit off of each other. And I don't think there's a lot of conversation yet on how they can perhaps eventually get integrated or have code shared between the two. Sorry, my phone's ringing. And so Bootkube is a self-hosting tool that is in the incubator, and it's been around for a while. I'm not sure how long, but the major differences, as discussed in the document, is that it pretty much sets up all the manifests beforehand and supports daemon sets and deployments. But it isn't a post install tool, which kubeadm I believe is. And it's not intended to be a post management tool. And that's where kubeadm has its main differences, I think, is that there's an intent there to have it be a management tool afterwards, where Bootkube is just a deployment tool to get Kubernetes up and running. I was wondering what your guys' thoughts about it were. It was just a conversation starter on how we can improve both projects and perhaps get a little bit of parity between the two.
So I had a quick look at the Google Doc. I think it's a great idea, trying to unify or sort of converge the two projects. And yeah, I think the biggest differentiator right now between kubeadm and Bootkube, I wouldn't say it's too much of a conceptual one, actually. You said that kubeadm is more of a management tool, but I would say the main premise of kubeadm is to bootstrap and set up a cluster. And we've had this sort of recent scope creep where we've gone into like upgrade territories and stuff like that. But I would say the heart of kubeadm is still a bootstrap tool, in my opinion. But in terms of the main difference of like the generation of manifests, I'd be quite interested to figure out like what the potential use case of that would be to a user, because it seems to me like the main value add there is that, you know, a thing can generate a manifest and then the user can edit the manifest before they deploy it, right? And I'd be quite interested to see sort of how that logic fits in with component config, which is rolling out more and more. And I'm just trying to figure out whether we could offer that flexibility in a different way without having to add like this generation logic to kubeadm, right? That would be my first, interest there.
So the use case that we have is that we take Bootkube and we generate manifests for the Tectonic product at CoreOS. And so it's a bootstrapping tool where we can customize the Kubernetes deployment sort of ad hoc or more flexibly than kubeadm does it currently. And so that's sort of the use case where we're coming from. But
I don't think there's any reason we can't make kubeadm be more extensible, and already is in some respects, to do its configuration for deployment. And sometimes I even think this rolls into anything beyond the core for lack of better words, could eventually be just an add-on manager, right, of some kind. And I think that punting that to that idea actually makes everything even a little bit cleaner, because then you're just deploying an add-on manager, which could be yours or ours or anybody's, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Would that be a plugin, or is that something else that you're thinking about?
I think it could be just a configuration of what add-on manager gets deployed, right? Like it's just specified as part of the deployment configuration. I saw that, I know where Lucas went. There he is. He's magic. He switched around to my screen, so it's kind of like tile one popped up, disappeared, popped up in a different tile. I know he had his hand raised before too.
Okay, yeah, so first off, thanks for creating the doc. I've been aiming to bring this up for too long, but haven't got around to it. So really appreciated that you for that initiative. Yeah, so I think Kubernetes, or at least in my understanding, we all want kubeadm and Bootkube to converge eventually. And I mean, Bootkube kind of predated kubeadm in the self-hosting stuff and all, right? And could be seen as like an experimental playground where you like made a lot of self-hosting experiments. They went really well, and now we're like bringing them into the kubeadm thing, which yeah. So that's yeah, exactly as Tim said. That's one. Then we have the manifest difference between Bootkube and kubeadm. I wouldn't say this is a problem. So have you seen the recent kubeadm face commands, etc.?
Yeah, I researched the phases, and the one concern that I had about the phases currently is that they're sort of hard-coded into the etc path instead of taking an assets directory and then performing an operation on it afterwards. It's basically modifying the current file system, as far as I can tell, to munge it into something that munge it into the state that it needs to get into, versus taking a box and then performing the actions on it. What is there a way that we could shift kubeadm to not perform the actions directly in etc and then have like a staging area that it does all those operations?
Probably not a staging area, but adding the option to configure the parts as you want them might be reasonable, right? For the use case, then you could just point it to your staging area.
Yeah.
So that is reasonable to me, and is, well, definitely I think we could improve. And the phase command is under alpha just for this reason, right? And yeah, what else was I gonna say?
The check pointer is still an issue. We need to support secrets at CoreOS, and I know that's a source subject upstream, but if we could have a pluggable check pointer in kubeadm, I think it would be cool.
I talked with Yuju no more than 14 minutes ago, and we are finalizing getting the initial pod checkpointing in place, and talked about the path for testing forwards. So we should have that. My goal is to get it merged by the end of the week, but I'm always at the whims of the node team, whether or not I like it or not. So I have to play by their rules. So a lot of hand holding and making sure that I buy into whatever way they want to. I know it's next week, I want to get it done even faster than that if I can, but it's all based upon their merging. So everything is there. There needs to be one more modification after conversation this morning made, and then I will do a separate PR for tests, which I can do after the freeze. And a part of it is because the testing infrastructure for the node is really weird, and we have to set up some type of testing infrastructure on our side, which will enable us to do things like test a self-hosted API server, which is a weird test, right? Because most of the configuration for deployments, basically, at least all of the end-to-end tests that exist currently for Kubernetes proper, stand up API servers separately. And this, in order to really test this in a way that is meaningful, we'd have to have kubeadm deploy a self-hosted API server with the annotation to checkpoint that API server. So that's like a shift from all the other tests that exist.
So real quick, with respect to the secrets checkpointing, I mean, I'm sure we could half-ass something along the lines of using a host volume mount into Etsy or some other path, and then having some sort of sidecar that essentially does that syncing explicitly. It's not ideal. It'll only work great when you have a set of trusted clusters, because those things will be sort of left around, you know, sort of plain text on disk. But it definitely is not definitely. I would say, in my estimation, it's really no worse than where we are today.
The secrets checkpointing is a little weird and very contentious, right? So I don't know if we're going to get resolution on that, because it kind of drives, it's like one of those weird chicken egg problems. As long as we can bootstrap the control plane and then rely on secrets from that point. But it seems to me like you guys are using checkpointed secrets for other conditions besides just the control plane restart, right? Because as long as the API server is brought back up, it can access the secrets from etcd, right? And so long as that condition exists, then then the cycle regenerates everything. But if you have conditions where, and this is not the case for kubeadm, if you have conditions where you want to restart something that relies on secrets and has a mount of that, then you're in this weird case, right?
I believe it's that former case, yeah, that we're in.
Are we going to run into that when, like, the self-hosted API server relies on secrets for TLS credentials? So, because, like, yeah, we're going to run into this then, right?
Yeah.
Because the self-hosted API server won't be able to load the TLS certs for etcd, and that, yeah, so it's going to need some kind of checkpointed secret, I imagine, going forward. Yeah, and then another difference between kubeadm and Bootcube that I'm thinking about now is that, from my understanding, Bootcube has always been very opinionated about a lot of the choices it makes. So they just deploy Flannel as a CNI provider, whereas kubeadm is a bit more sort of vendor agnostic. So yeah, that might be quite interesting to look at, sort of the differences of deployments there, because, you know, we don't assume that we have a functioning DNS server and that affects self-hosted etcd. So yeah, there's a bunch of complications there that might be looking into as well, to think when we start thinking about convergence.
We do support
Calico?
Yeah, Calico now, but yeah, that's definitely something that we should look into as well.
Regarding the earlier thing that kubeadm is more a management tool than just spin up once and, like, just for bootstrapping, I kind of agree that, well, we have the upgrade functionality now, right? But it's more for user convenience and like more for this flow that you can do, like, have any bare metal host, just install the package and do kubeadm in it, and when you then have to upgrade eventually, or sooner rather than later, you just issue this command and it will do this thing. Also, we're kind of staging the bootstrap token the Bootstrap token like UX there. It might get in as a kubectl command or a kubectl extension command or whatever in the future, which is, or whatever we do when we reconsider service accounts and secrets v2 and think more about that. But anyway, we have the token command there as well, and kubeadm join is kind of just doing the discovery thing, making the token validation possible. Then the kubelet does everything else. So it is, I would say, yes, it is a thin management wrapper, but well, a very thin one. The main the main focus of kubeadm is to bootstrap a cluster and do that really well with the minimum effort for the user needed, but still have the scope set very small. Well, have the scope really focused. So kubeadm only does 2 operations. It talks to the Kubernetes API once available, and it writes files to disk. These are the 2 only ones, compared to like COPS or whatever that sees the whole cluster, all nodes in the cluster, knows the state of a full system. kubeadm is only focused on the Kubernetes API and locally in the node.
Do you foresee like a convergence in V2, or should we focus sooner on the V1 stuff to try and get some sort of convergence?
As soon as possible, absolutely. And we're kind of working on that as quickly as we can. As Tim said, like one of the dependencies are well, checkpointing in some form. Robert, I think, pointed out here that we might, so now that we have the pod checkpointing, you might be able, like in core, right? You might be able to remove that logic and only do secrets for the time being until we might eventually do checkpoint secrets or whatever. But last time some months ago, we brought it up with the rest of the community, and it was an hour-long meeting only dedicated to this conversation. Should we checkpoint secrets or not? And we didn't finish on time even. So, yeah.
It was very contentious. Some issues are pretty contentious, and that is one of them. And community contentious issues, unless they have a defined set of here are the known issues and here are how we are addressing them, will always go around in this weird circle. And some of those issues have literally existed in this project since Epoch and have not had a resolution. So,
yeah. So this is one we know we're gonna run into sooner or later, as Jamie said as well, because, well, for now we're thinking of using secrets and at the same time working with SIG to improve the authorization mechanisms in Kubernetes instead of like punting on secrets and saying it's too insecure for cluster credentials. But yeah, we'll see with that one. Anything else?
No, I didn't have anything else. We can move on if there's nothing else on this one.
I guess I
appreciate it.
Can I ask a meta question, which is like, we don't want a monoculture, right? And what do you want to happen with Bootkube? And like, why do we not want to have Bootkube and kubeadm? And like, it feels like we decided at the very beginning of this whole exercise that we were not going to have a monoculture, and we were going to encourage tools like Bootkube to exist.
I guess the goal is to share what we've learned, share what kubeadm has learned, and see if we can merge, either make Bootkube into a library potentially, make it something that kubeadm brings in as a library dependency, or just pull in code into kubeadm. There's not a firm goal for BootCube in general to change it as it is today. It's just bringing it under discussion on where do we want each of the projects to be going, and how they could potentially benefit from each other.
So,
yeah, but I mean, I feel like one way to do that is to like show that BootCube is better, right? Like implement the Machines API, and then BootCube will win, right? If BootCube is better, right? Like, and I feel like we're all very good about like borrowing ideas from each other, and I feel like it's a marketplace of ideas, and more than the code is like the idea of like self-hosted, which came from BootCube and is your collective idea, I guess. It definitely came from you guys. I don't know the exact, it's. I don't think we have to reuse code as much as the ideas are what matter more to me.
Right, and that was mostly around the documentation. Is there's these things that we think that we could benefit from.
And that's super valuable. I would love to see a Machines API implementation that's based on what, I'm not sure whether it applies, but like whether a Machines API implementation based on the BootCube stack, or is that like, it sounded like BootCube was just for the first node, is that right? And then, so how would that apply to the Machines API, if you know what I mean?
I don't know exactly. I'll have to take it back to Aaron and ask him about it. What is the Machines API? I'm new to Kubernetes.
It's just like so it's basically a way to, through the Kubernetes API, you can bring up you can create a new instance in your cloud provider, and it will then somehow join the cluster as a node, and it's like that.
Right. Yeah, that is non-existent in BootCube today. I don't think that's probably ever going to be a goal, from my understanding, but.
So there's a common set of problems, and I do agree, like I like plethora of ideas at some moment in time, but there's also Redux and the open source mantra, which is with enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. And if we put things in a common place and we all exercise it, it's of benefit to CoreOS, and it's a benefit of the community to have common set of reuse code, because in that case, you are at the point of having many people leverage it versus a select few.
Well, I mean, I feel like I'm being pushed into arguing a case I don't necessarily agree with, but I feel like we decided to have many installers, right? And I personally think, my installer is the best and it should win, right? But, like we should have one installer is my opinion. But we decided not to do that. And I feel like the idea of saying everyone should adopt one bit of code is not what we decided.
Well, so, CoreOS is dropping in this meeting wanting to contribute back. They want to have a common set because it's in their best interest, right? Well, I mean, this has not been new. This has been going on for a long time.
I was asking, like, what the goal was, whether it was to use that common set of code or not.
The goal is to propagate out what the differences are between the two projects, and perhaps get convergence of either project on its feature set and its implementation, perhaps, and propagate just how it was done and the technical details about it.
And the minimizing their code surface and maintenance benefits them, right? So eventually it benefits everybody.
So Kubernetes is special, Justin, in that regard that it is not a full installer, right? It is a tiny bit of code that just initializes your cluster enough to do the MVP thing, unless pretty much everything else in the community, except for BootCube. So here we have BootCube and KubeADM alongside each other, having pretty much the same scope and trying to achieve the same tasks. Regarding the Machines API, that's Tectonic. That's maintaining a full stack. And Tectonic might be able to implement the Machines API and should do, but KubeADM and BootCube are very limited in scope and small enough. Then we want convergence to have less code to maintain for both parts. And we then also, if you're this installer that does the grand full thing in your way, you will have a lot of, and like there's literally 70 of these full installers end to end that provision machines, do their thing in their way, install add-ons, whatever IAM roles.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the argument. There are too many ways. It's a classic.
Well, so I mean,
argument.
That is okay.
No, but I think the problem is, and we talked about this before, and it got as contentious before, is, we talked about the problem of KubeUp, the idea of a monopoly provider, and the consequence of that being that we didn't then document how to do things. And that is, in my opinion, what got us into the mess with KubeUp, right? And that is why I'm so wary of saying everyone should use KubeADM and KubeADM will do this stuff magically for you, because what we've learned is people don't want to use anything. Like they don't want to use anything we prescribe. And so we can't say, it's okay to say use KubeADM, but we have to also document it. And we have to say, if someone else wants to maintain something different from KubeADM, we should encourage that. We should welcome that. We shouldn't say, oh, but you're doing it wrong. Oh, but you're going to have to maintain all this code. We should say, that's great. It is going to be more work for you, but here's the documentation. And that is, I think, what went wrong with KubeUp.
That's what we've been doing. I mean, that's part of the effort of documenting the phases. That's part of the effort of...
Not KubeADM phases, though. There's a big difference between KubeADM phases. Like, phases aren't a Kubernetes concept. Phases are
But the documentation has been an ongoing thing. And Fabrizio and Lucas have been doing a bang-up job with regards to that. So
exactly. That is, like, we do use KubeADM as an experimentation ground, right, for identifying what is the common thing needed for any Kubernetes cluster. Then we have a lot of documentation efforts and also design docs for KubeADM. Here's exactly all the things that KubeADM is doing. If you don't want to use KubeADM, you still have this documentation that you might want to do this, you might want to do this and this for getting API aggregation, for example, to work. Yeah, if you don't want to do that, or you're by yourself, you have KubeADM as a tool that does the minimum viable thing for you, and then you can focus on the higher level tasks. That is the
and perhaps it's just a matter of like taking the same content and spinning it so that it doesn't mention KubeADM, so that people that don't want to use KubeADM don't feel that they are being pushed into KubeADM, right?
So one thing, and hopefully you guys can hear me because I have crappy internet. I talked to Kelsey earlier about, like, he did an update to Kubernetes the hard way, and I'm like, hey, why don't we sort of like make that official? I think that's something that we could take on. I think, if somebody wanted to talk to Kelsey and say, hey, let's turn this into sort of like the make the hard way documentation official, maybe expand it a little bit. I think part of the problem here is that there's part of the power of Kubernetes is that there are so many ways to set it up, and there is no single best way to do it for all scenarios. Like something that somebody's going to use in production compared to let me turn on video. Compared to a stack of Raspberry Pis is going to be, that's a tall order to have one tool that's actually going to handle all of those things. I agree that, like, kubeadmin we should have documentation that talks about here's how things stitch together regardless of the tool. I think it's just a matter of time and funding in terms of what's going to have this biggest impact on the most set of users. And so I think most people, at least in this group right now, are like, for most end users, the biggest impact thing we can do is actually get something that is to disagree with also having documentation that covers how to do this stuff in an unopinionated way. I think it's just a matter of resourcing. Did that come through? I don't know if y'all can hear me. I still have no power. It's getting cold. Send help. Is that my internet connection crapping out, or is nobody saying anything?
I think we're all just thinking. I think no one's saying anything.
Okay. Yeah. No. So I mean, so Justin, if you wanted to take on sort of like, you know, working with Kelsey and like doing the hard way stuff and making it on Cadence.io, I think that would be awesome. It's a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think my feedback on that is it's not my battle, right? Like my view is we should have one installer tool, and we should make that work. And I've lost that battle, and I feel like the people that want many installers should be the ones documenting it. And it feels like KubeADM is part of that effort. And KubeADM is already, I feel like also that KubeADM has done most of this work in that that you have a document which describes it in a KubeADM focused way or KubeADM centric way. And I think we just need to make sure that that document is in the same way that KubeUp had like a lot of these decisions written down maybe in code comments and things like that. Like we need to extract that in a way that people that are not going to use KubeUp or are not going to use KubeADM, that don't want to use a pre-baked tool, that they still feel that Kubernetes is installable, and that they don't feel, oh, you know, that I have to use this complicated script or this complicated script written in Go to install it. Like that is like COPS owns it, right? COPS says like, yes, it's complicated. You install this complicated thing, and it manages it for you. And I think that it would be great if KubeADM makes it simple, and let's write it down.
I don't know if there's a document that describes how to get a Linux desktop machine up and running without using a distribution or installer, right? I mean, like that stuff is all honestly tribal knowledge, and even shit like Deb Bootstrap.
That's what Kelsey wrote. It's the Linux
box voodoo. So like,
Joe, it's the Linux from scratch document that Kelsey. I think Kelsey's was a joke on that, right?
Yeah, and I think, you know, but even I think if we look at Kubernetes the hard way and the stuff that Kelsey does, he is the way he treats networking and the underlying runtime and the decisions that are made in terms of how things are wired together is still pretty opinionated. So that is still a high opinion type of way of doing things and putting stuff together. I'm not sure, you know, like, yes, I would love to see such a document exist. I'm not sure how we make that happen when everybody is, you know, focused on honestly on other things. And from the point of view of you know, companies like Heptio, our focus is that we want to actually have something that is supported upstream and is going to actually work across the large set of environments that we're supporting people with. And honestly, that doesn't really. If we had a document that you're describing, that would be awesome. I'd love to point customers at that too. But in terms of priorities, that's not where our priorities are right now.
Yeah, I guess
would love to see somebody do that, but I think.
I feel like I should have raised this a long time.
Somebody stepping up, you know, it takes people to get stuff done. So,
yeah, I feel like it should be a prerequisite for trying to make KubeADM special is to not poison the well, which is, in other words, like, why did KubeUp was special, right? Why did KubeUp fail? And why did KubeUp like do its thing? It's because it didn't have documentation outside of KubeUp, and then the sort of failure pattern was people would evolve the requirements for installing Kubernetes. They would make a change in the same, like, to the official tool, right, the special tool, and they would not document it, and that was considered okay. And we have to avoid that pattern, and I think a way to avoid that pattern is to require that.
I want to interrupt everybody here. I want to table this discussion because at some point we have other agenda items that we need to reach today, and this is kind of a philosophical argument that folks can debate in another venue, which I'm totally cool with. If there are action items that folks would want to address, I'd be happy to entertain those action items if people want to sign up for it, and we can add them to the agenda list. But we have other things that we need to address and talk about today. So I want to table this discussion if it's possible.
Yeah, one last word that I want to say there, Justin. Poisoning the well is pretty strong language. So, that's a different discussion. And I personally went through and I put it in the chat. When we did the Bootstrap tokens, I documented that in a way that was not super kubeadmin specific. So, I think on a feature by feature basis, we've been trying to make sure that there's actually good document. What we don't have is something that stitches it together as a guide that's for end users. Those features are documented outside of kubeadmin.
I don't mean poisoning the well. I just mean basically seeding the seeds of its own, avoiding the same mistakes that we made previously with KubeUp, right? And that it goes beyond just the KubeUp project, but to the whole Kubernetes project. And I like very much what you did with Bootstrap tokens, where it doesn't feel like a kubeadm specific feature, and we're going to use that in kops and other things, I think. So I think that's great.
All right. So as Tim says, let's move on.
Yep. Lucas.
Yeah. So just PR is Moyer here today from Heptio?
I don't see him in the call.
No, me neither. Anyway, so we did the CA pinning last release, as Joe and Matt discussed, and the others here in this group, and we said back then that we would convert this, we would require the CA hash to be passed to kubeadm join in order to have a fully secure flow, where this workers impersonate masters thing can't happen. So the question is now, should we make kubeadm join -- token without the CA pinning failure mode, or should we require the user to opt out of the CA pinning explicitly, or should we allow the normal kubeadm join without CA pinning to still work? That is the question.
Maybe bring that up in your kubeadm office hours with the users of kubeadm.
This has been our plan for a while. I think it definitely improves the bootstrapping security stance. I think we have a very clear error in that PR where if you hit this error, just add this flag and you're good to go. I think it makes people stop and think about it. I'm okay with this going in. We're not in GA yet, so changing the CLI interface is still acceptable, and I think this is a good enough reason to do it.
Tim, what do you think?
I willfully abstained from security conversations because every time I tread into it, I start to uncover more things because I'm one of those people that likes to dig, and I'm like, what's this mean? And then you're like, oh my gosh, that's not what I thought it meant. So I will punt and leave that for Moyer and Joe to talk about. The other aspects, other things, I'll happily chime in on.
I'm happy to go into more detail for anybody on the meeting here, but other than that, I'm cool with it. I just want to hear if anybody here has huge objections. It's definitely a release note level thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I'm fine with this as well. We've warned the users before, where we have followed the deprecation policy, or changing behaviors policy, and we're not in GA yet, which is a reason to do this switch now.
I think if we start to require a CA hash, we should raise the priority for issue which prints the proper join command during the token create. That will solve all the issues.
I do think that's a good argument, and I don't see any reason not to do so. So, yeah, that could be a requirement, and we could then go ahead and do this. there are no other objections.
So the requirement the token command stack
Yeah, we can hear you.
command lines so that people can very easily copy paste. Is that the idea?
Yeah, so the idea is to, well, you get the kubeadm join command on kubeadm init, but if you clear your console or something, you can definitely fetch the token again and things, but it's not as straightforward. Like, it's not as user-friendly as it could be with kubeadm token list. So, yeah. And, yeah, we also talked a bit about component config. We touched on it as well, at least earlier in the meeting. A quick status update on that is that the kubelet API is gonna soon be graduated to beta, hopefully in time for 1.9. It's gonna be pretty tight, but Mike Torfin was optimistic when I talked to him earlier today. We already graduated, so the first thing with component config is to move out. Currently, all component configuration is in the same API group. So the first thing is to move it out to component.config.io. And then these component config types will be in different directories in the core, and they will serve as the API to talk to the component, right? kubeproxy was moved out to its own API group. Kubelet is next up. Kubescheduler is soon there. Probably most of them are going to be alpha in 1.9, but hopefully they will graduate to beta in 1.10, so people actually can start using them and consume configuration from a file that's versioned and has all the API machinery things, all those features in it automatically, instead of having this very painful way of upgrading and things and changing behavior with flags.
I think that's all going to be well and good, except for the one conundrum will be the API server. Everything else, I think, I don't see us getting around that, and I don't even want to tackle it. But the controller manager and scheduler, absolutely, that will get a nice upgrade kick and just put it into a file. So,
Tim, is your concern there the user shooting themselves in the foot and like locking themselves out of their API server, or can you?
That's part of it. Another part is like if you have everything in a configuration file that's stored inside of etcd and you're self-hosting the API server, how do you get? You'd have to checkpoint that config map onto the file too, or onto the file system for restoration. So that's a separate thing that would be required in order for you to enable that feature. Config maps aren't as contentious as other things, but it still gets there.
Yeah, and to clarify to others in the meeting, you can still, you can deliver the file however you want. It's just a normal file, but the most common method that also kubeadm will use for most components is delivering these files via a config map, as Tim said. So, and that also makes it easier to control authorization and different, changing the configuration in the cluster will get far more easier. For example, for the kubeproxy, with just updating the config map and re-rolling the daemon sets.
Maintenance becomes a lot easier because exactly, and then with high available components too, because the config map is usually loaded after the point where they're doing the checking. You should be able to shoot it, and the other one that pops up should have the new configuration.
I'm probably being dumb, but API server can access etcd and read it directly Or is this about like if you change like your etcd configuration, for example?
The problem is the API server, you'd have to bake the code for initialization into the API server, which you could do, but that would have to be part of the effort, right? So baking it in so that it would know where to look for its config map, right? Otherwise, you have a chicken egg problem, right?
Yeah. Jamie asked whether there's any documentation on component config available. I have to check that up, but I think most of the things are like, so we have, yes, a component configuration API, a proposal. I could dig that up in Kubernetes community, which was accepted and written by Mike Denise here in this SIG some time ago. But for individual components, I don't think so yet.
Okay, because I'm just wondering like what is involved from a KubeADM point of view, what we need to do specifically. Because I guess this is like a 110. We'll be doing this in the 110 dev cycle, so it's just good to get all the context now.
We need to basically create configuration files that will be specified as a config map and passed in and referenced from the components.
Okay, and then if I were to dynamically update a component's config, that would go through the API server and then it mutates that file on disk? How does that work?
So it depends upon the component, because not all components have all the jiggery-pokery to do dynamic configuration. The only component that I'm aware of that actually has this is the kubelet, where it will auto-detect and reload. And I don't know if it works in all cases, but I do know that the other components, you have to shoot them in order for them to restart, and that was done on purpose because of how state is stored. And if you were to magically change the configuration parameter, all that state could potentially be invalid. So like the scheduler is a good example, where you would basically change the configuration, and then if you had HA, you basically just restart the pod, and it should do the right thing.
So if I would change the file, or I would make like a request through the API server and then restart.
You would change the config map,
Okay,
then you would
right.
then you would request a pod to restart.
Right, got it.
And as far as I know, we don't even have component config for the API server. Tim, is that right? I don't think the types aren't even there.
No, not that I'm aware of.
No. So definitely some work to be done there. But yeah, it's cool to see progress on the kubelet and kubeproxy as the first ones, and then the scheduler, then the controller manager, and lastly the API server. And this is again one of the areas. So people ask, why isn't KubeADM GA? And it's because we still have things to document. Yes, we still have features to graduate. We still are waiting for component config to be a thing, because when KubeADM goes GA, component config will also go GA, will be GA. So this is the part we're gonna go with.
I'm a huge fan of like GA'd features are boring as all get out, or GA'd components, because that means you've actually done the due diligence along the way. So I think by the time we actually get to GA, I'm totally cool with letting it be a long pull. And by the time we get there, it should be non-controversial, right?
Exactly. It's not something we want to rush. Like, for example, right now in the config file, we have string maps for the command line arguments. It works for like 99% of the users, but it's unversioned and no schema, nothing, no structure, no validation. So we don't want to graduate that. And hence, we're pushing on components config instead and working with the community to do the right thing. And then someday we'll get to GA and it will be not controversial at all. So yeah. Robert, do you want to speak the things you wrote out, or should I?
I can try to. So just a quick PSA that we have a KubeCon session now. It's on Wednesday afternoon for a SIG update. Please let Lucas or I know if you want to help chair that. I put some notes in about failing tests in TestGrid. If you have a chance, please look at TestGrid and help debug and fix those tests. I think those were the main two things. We also skipped Justin's mission statement doc, although we only have 5 minutes, so we may have to do that next week.
Well, I was just going to say, it's just a write-up of what I did last week, so it's there if people want to comment and rip it apart. That would be wonderful.
Thank you. And yeah, a note on the failing tests. So pretty much, well, so the fails of the kubeadm upgrade tests are expected because of the way upgrade tests are written. This is another area we're working with SIG testing on. Currently, there's a lot of GCE assumptions in the upgrade tests, and we're working on getting those, well, not to be there and expressed in a generic way. But these are working. But the one that is actually failing for real is the Calico test. I'm not even sure so where that left in some Calico contributed, like, here is an ED test for kubeadm, but it's half done, I think, or something. Should definitely fix that.
Can you poke me on Slack with the issue, and I'll link in Casey.
Cool. Yeah, I'll do so. Okay. Anything else, Jamie?
Well, we have like 3 minutes left, so yeah, I just wanted to want to know like the general status of like P1 items for the 1.9 priorities, because like code freeze is next week, and I'm not sure, whether we're going to miss anything, whether it'd be useful to have folks jump on stuff if we really want to end before code freeze. So yeah, but I'm not sure like whether this meeting is like or next week is the right, time to have that discussion, right? Where we are in terms of 1.9 deliverables.
Maybe we can add that to tomorrow's discussion.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. We'll chat about that more tomorrow, 9 PT in the kubeadm focused meeting. But yeah, I mean, we have good progress. We're not gonna get the full AJ end-to-end thing working in time, but we'll document how to do AJ with kubeadm in the docs soon, and we'll also, yeah.
Are docs like, is the code freeze applicable to docs too, or can you submit doc pull requests up until the release?
There's another docs freeze, but I don't remember when.
Okay.
Cool. That's all for today, I think. Thanks everyone for attending, and happy Tuesday.